gave rise to apprehensions which were the more cruel because so indefinite. All forms of suffering crowded my mind. We reached the door of the chamber and the abbé opened it. I then saw Henriette, dressed in white, sitting on her little sofa which was placed before the fireplace, on which were two vases filled with flowers. Flowers were also on a table near the window. The expression of the abbé's face, which was that of amazement at the change in the room, now restored to its former state, showing me that the dying woman had sent away the repulsive preparations which surround a sick bed. She had spent the last waning strength of fever in decorating her room to receive him whom in that final hour she loved above all things else. Surrounded by clouds of lace, her shrunken face, which had the greenish pallor of a magnolia flower as it opens, resembled the first outline of a cherished head drawn in chalks upon the yellow canvas of a portrait. To feel how deeply the vulture's talons now buried themselves in my heart, imagine the eyes of that outlined face finished and full of life, hollow eyes which shone with a brilliancy unusual in a dying person. The calm majesty given to her in the past by her constant victory over sorrow was there no longer. Her forehead, the only part of her face which still kept its beautiful proportions, wore an expression of aggressive will and covert threats. In spite of the waxy texture of her elongated face, inward fires were issuing from it like the fluid mist which seems to flame above the fields of a hot day. Her hollow temples, her sunken cheeks showed the interior formation of the face, and the smile upon her whitened lips vaguely resembled the grin of death. Her robe, which was folded across her breast, showed the emaciation of her beautiful figure. The expression of her head said plainly that she knew she was changed, and that the thought filled her with bitterness. She was no longer the arch Henriette, nor the sublime and saintly Madame de Morcerf, but the nameless something of Bossuet struggling against annihilation, driven to the selfish battle of life against death by hunger and balked desire. I took her hand, which was dry and burning, to kiss it, as I seated myself beside her. She guessed my sorrowful surprise from the very effort that I made to hide it. Her discolored lips drew up from her famished teeth trying to form a smile, the forced smile with which we strive to hide either the irony of vengeance, the expectation of pleasure, the intoxication of our souls, or the fury of disappointment. "Ah, my poor Felix, this is death," she said, "and you do not like death, odious death, of which every human creature, even the boldest lover, feels a horror. This is the end of love, I knew it would be so. Lady Dudley will never see you thus surprised at the change in her. Ah! Why have I so longed for you, Felix? You have come at last, and I reward your devotion by the same horrible sight that made the Comte de Rance a Trappist. I, who hoped to remain ever beautiful and noble in your memory, to live there eternally a lily, I it is who destroy your illusions. True love cannot calculate. But stay, do not go, stay. Monsieur Arrigit said I was much better this morning, I shall recover. Your looks will bring me back to life. When I regain a little strength, when I can take some nourishment, I shall be beautiful again. I am scarcely 35. There are many years of happiness before me. Happiness renews our youth. Yes, I must know happiness. I have made delightful plans. We will leave Kloshgard and go to Italy. Tears filled my eyes and I turned to the window as if to look at the flowers. The abbé followed me hastily, and bending over the bouquet whispered, "No tears. Henriette, do you no longer care for our dear valley?" I said, as if to explain my sudden movement. "Oh, yes," she said, turning her forehead to my lips with a fond motion. "But without you it is fatal to me, without these," she added, putting her burning lips to my ear and whispering the words like a sigh. I was horror-struck at the wild caress, and my will was not strong enough to repress the nervous agitation I felt throughout this scene. I listened without reply, or rather I replied by a fixed smile and signs of comprehension, wishing not to thwart her, but to treat her as a mother does a child. Struck at first with the change in her person, I now perceived that the woman, once so dignified in her bearing, showed in her attitude, her voice, her manners, in her looks and her ideas, the naive ignorance of a child, its artless graces, its eager movements, its careless indifference to everything that is not its own desire, in short all the weaknesses which commend a child to our protection. Is it so with all dying persons? Do they strip off social disguises till they are like children who have never put them on? Or was it that the Countess, feeling herself on the borders of eternity, rejected every human feeling except love? "You will bring me health as you used to do, Felix," she said, "and our valley will still be my blessing. How can I help eating what you will give me? You are such a good nurse. Besides, you are so rich in health and vigor that life is contagious beside you. My friend, prove to me that I need not die blighted. They think my worst suffering is thirst. Oh, yes, my thirst is great, dear friend. The waters of the Indra are terrible to see, but the thirst of my heart is greater far. I thirsted for thee," she said in a smothered voice, taking my hands in hers, which were burning, and drawing me close that she might whisper in my ear. "My anguish has been in not seeing thee. Did you not bid me live? I will live, I too will ride on horseback, I will know life, Paris, fetus, pleasures, all. Ah! Natalie, that awful cry, which time and distance render cold, rang in the ears of the old priest and in mine. The tones of that glorious voice pictured the battles of a lifetime, the anguish of a true love lost. The Countess rose with an impatient movement like that of a child which seeks a plaything. When the confessor saw her thus, the poor man fell upon his knees and prayed with clasped hands. "Yes, to live," she said, making me rise and support her, "to live with realities and not with delusions. All has been delusions in my life, I have counted them up, these lies, these impostures. How can I die, I who have never lived? I who have never roamed a moor to meet him?" She stopped, seemed to listen, and to smell some odor through the walls. "Felix, the vintagers are dining, and she said, in the voice of a child, the mistress, am hungry. It is so in love, they are happy, they, Kyrie eleison, said the poor abbé, who with clasped hands and eyes raised to heaven was reciting his litanies. She flung an arm around my neck, kissed me violently, and pressed me to her, saying, "You shall not escape me now." She gave the little nod with which in former days she used, when leaving me for an instant, to say she would return. "We will dine together," she said. "I will go and tell Maynard." She turned to go, but fainted, and I laid her, dressed as she was, upon the bed. "You carried me thus before," she murmured, opening her eyes. She was very light, but burning. As I took her in my arms I felt the heat of her body. Monsieur Deslandes entered and seemed surprised at the decoration of the room, but seeing me, all was explained to him. "We must suffer much to die," she said in a changed voice. The doctor sat down and felt her pulse. Then he rose quickly and said a few words in a low voice to the priest, who left the room beckoning me to follow him. "What are you going to do?" I said to the doctor. "Save her from intolerable agony," he replied. Who could have believed in so much strength? We cannot understand how she can have lived in this state so long. This is the 42nd day since she has either eaten or drunk. Monsieur Deslandes called for Maynard. The Abbé Birotteau took me to the gardens. "Let us leave her to the doctor," he said. "With Maynard's help he will wrap her in opium." "Well, you have heard her now, if indeed it is she herself." "No," I said. "It is not she." I was stupefied with grief. I left the grounds by the little gate of the lower terrace and went to the punt, in which I hid to be alone with my thoughts. I tried to detach myself from the being in which I lived, a torture like that with which the Tartars punish adultery by fastening a limb of the guilty man in a piece of wood and leaving him with a knife to cut it off if he would not die of hunger. My life was a failure, too. Despair suggested many strange ideas to me. Sometimes I vowed to die beside her, sometimes to bury myself at Meilleray among the Trappists. I looked at the windows of the room where Henriette was dying, fancying I saw the light that was burning there the night I betrothed my soul to hers. Ah! Ought I not to have followed the simple life she had created for me, keeping myself faithfully to her while I worked in the world? Had she not bidden me become a great man expressly that I might be saved from base and shameful passions? Chastity. Was it not a sublime distinction which I had not known how to keep? Love, as Arabella understood it, suddenly disgusted me. As I raised my humbled head asking myself where, in future, I could look for light and hope, what interest could hold me to life, the air was stirred by a sudden noise. I turned to the terrace and there saw Madeleine walking alone, with slow steps. During the time it took me to ascend the terrace, intending to ask the dear child the reason of the cold look she had given me when kneeling at the foot of the cross, she had seated herself on the bench. When she saw me approach her, she rose, pretending not to have seen me, and returned towards the house in a significantly hasty manner. She hated me, she fled from her mother's murderer. When I reached the portico I saw Madeleine like a statue, motionless and erect, evidently listening to the sound of my steps. Jacques was sitting in the portico. His attitude expressed the same insensibility to what was going on about him that I had noticed when I first saw him. It suggested ideas such as we lay aside in some corner of our mind to take up and study at our leisure. I have remarked that young persons who carry death within them are usually unmoved at funerals. I longed to question that gloomy spirit. Had Madeleine kept her thoughts to herself, or had she inspired Jacques with her hatred? You know, Jacques, I said, to begin the conversation, that in me you have a most devoted brother. Your friendship is useless to me, I shall follow my mother, he said, giving me a sullen look of pain. Jacques, I cried, you, too, against me. He coughed and walked away. When he returned he showed me his handkerchief stained with blood. Do you understand that? He said. Thus they had each of them a fatal secret. I saw before long that the brother and sister avoided each other. Henriette laid low, all was in ruins at Clochegourde. Madame is asleep, Maynard came to say, quite happy in knowing that the Countess was out of pain. In these dreadful moments, though each person knows the inevitable end, strong affections fasten on such minor joys. Minutes are centuries which we long to make restorative. We wish our dear ones to lie on roses, we pray to bear their sufferings. We cling to the hope that their last moment may be to them unexpected. Monsieur Deslandes has ordered the flowers taken away, they excited Madame's nerves, said Maynard. Then it was the flowers that caused her delirium, she herself was not a part of it. Come, Monsieur Felix, added Maynard, come and see Madame. She is beautiful as an angel. I returned to the dying woman just as the setting sun was gilding the lacework on the roofs of the chateau of Azy. All was calm and pure. A soft light lit the bed on which my Henriette was lying, wrapped in opium. The body was, as it were, annihilated. The soul alone reigned on that face, serene as the skies when the tempest is over. Blanche and Henriette, two sublime faces of the same woman, reappeared, all the more beautiful because my recollection, my thought, my imagination, aiding nature, repaired the devastation of each dear feature, where now the soul triumphant sent its gleams through the calm pulsations of her breathing. The two abbés were sitting at the foot of the bed. The Count stood, as though stupefied by the banners of death which floated above that adored being. I took her seat on the sofa. We all four turned to each other looks in which admiration for that celestial beauty mingled with tears of mourning. The lights of thought announced the return of the divine spirit to that glorious tabernacle. The Abbé Dominies and I spoke in signs, communicating to each other our mutual ideas. Yes, the angels were watching her. Yes, their flaming swords shone above that noble brow, which the august expression of her virtue made, as it were, a visible soul conversing with the spirits of its sphere. The lines of her face cleared, all in her was exalted and became majestic beneath the unseen incense of the seraphs who guarded her. The green tints of bodily suffering gave place to pure white tones, the cold wan pallor of approaching death. Jacques and Madeleine entered. Madeleine made us quiver by the adoring impulse which flung her on her knees beside the bed, crying out, with clasped hand, "My mother, here is my mother." Jacques smiled. He knew he would follow her where she went. "She is entering the haven," said the Abbé Birotteau. The Abbé Dominies looked at me as if to say, "Did I not tell you the star would rise in all its glory?" Madeleine knelt with her eyes fixed on her mother, breathing when she breathed, listening to the soft breath, the last thread by which she held to life, and which we followed in terror, fearing that every effort of respiration might be the last. Like an angel at the gates of the sanctuary, the young girl was eager yet calm, strong but reverent. At that moment the Angelus rang from the village clock tower. Waves of tempered air brought its reverberations to remind us that this was the sacred hour when Christianity repeats the words said by the angel to the woman who has redeemed the faults of her sex. Ave Maria. Surely, at this moment the words were a salutation from heaven. The prophecy was so plain, the event so near that we burst into tears. The murmuring sounds of evening, melodious breezes in the leafage, last warbling of the birds, the hum and echo of the insects, the voices of the waters, the plaintive cry of the tree frog, all country things were bidding farewell to the loveliest lily of the valley, to her simple, rural life. The religious poesy of the hour, now added to that of nature, expressed so vividly the psalm of the departing soul that our sobs redoubled. Though the door of the chamber was open, we were also plunged in contemplation of the scene, as if to imprint its memories forever on our souls, that we did not notice the family servants who were kneeling as a group and praying fervently. These poor people, living on hope, had believed their mistress might be spared, and this plain warning overcame them. At a sign from the Abbé Birotteau, the old huntsman went to fetch the curate of Sach. The doctor, standing by the bed, calm as science, and holding the hand of the still sleeping woman, had made the confessor a sign to say that this sleep was the only hour without pain which remained for the recalled angel. The moment had come to administer the last sacraments of the Church. At 9 o'clock she awoke quietly, looked at us with surprised but gentle eyes, and we beheld our idol once more in all the beauty of former days. "Mother, you are too beautiful to die, life and health are coming back to you," cried Madeleine. "Dear daughter, I shall live, in these," she answered, smiling. Then followed heart-rending embraces of the mother and her children. Monsieur de Morcerf kissed his wife upon her brow. She colored when she saw me. "Dear Felix," she said, "this is, I think, the only grief that I shall ever have caused you. Forget all that I may have said, I, a poor creature much beside myself." She held out her hand, I took it and kissed it. Then she said, with her chaste and gracious smile, as in the old days, "Felix." We all left the room and went into the salon during the last confession. I approached Madeleine. In presence of others she could not escape me without a breach of civility, but, like her mother, She looked at no one, and kept silence without even once turning her eyes in my direction. "Dear Madeleine," I said in a low voice, "what have you against me? Why do you show such coldness in the presence of death, which ought to reconcile us all?" "I hear in my heart what my mother is saying at this moment," she replied, with a look which Inges gave to his Mother of God, that Virgin, already sorrowful, preparing herself to protect the world for which her Son was about to die. "And you condemn me at the moment when your mother absolves me, if indeed I am guilty." You, she said, "always yourself." The tones of her voice revealed the determined hatred of a Corsican, implacable as the judgments of those who, not having studied life, admit of no extenuation of faults committed against the laws of the heart. An hour went by in deepest silence. The Abbé Birotteau came to us after receiving the Countess's general confession, and we followed him back to the room where Henriette, under one of those impulses which often come to noble minds, all sisters of one intent, had made them dress her in the long white garment which was to be her shroud. We found her sitting up, beautiful from expiation, beautiful in hope. I saw in the fireplace the black ashes of my letters which had just been burned, a sacrifice which, as her confessor afterwards told me, she had not been willing to make until the hour of her death. She smiled upon us all with the smile of other days. Her eyes, moist with tears, gave evidence of inward lucidity. She saw the celestial joys of the promised land. "Dear Felix," she said, holding out her hand and pressing mine, "stay with us. You must be present at the last scene of my life, not the least painful among many such, but one in which you are concerned." She made a sign and the door was closed. At her request the Count sat down, the Abbé Birotteau and I remained standing. Then with Maynard's help the Countess rose and knelt before the astonished Count, persisting in remaining there. A moment after, when Maynard had left the room, she raised her head which she had laid upon her husband's knees. "Though I have been a faithful wife to you," she said, in a faint voice, "I have sometimes failed in my duty. I have just prayed to God to give me strength to ask your pardon. I have given to a friendship outside of my family more affectionate care than I have shown to you. Perhaps I have sometimes irritated you by the comparisons you may have made between these cares, these thoughts, and those I gave to you. I have had," she said, in a sinking voice, "a deep friendship, which no one, not even he who has been its object, has fully known. Though I have continued virtuous according to all human laws, though I have been an irreproachable wife to you, still other thoughts, voluntary or involuntary, have often crossed my mind and, in this hour, I fear I have welcomed them too warmly. But as I have tenderly loved you, and continued to be your submissive wife, and as the clouds passing beneath the sky do not alter its purity, I now pray for your blessing with a clean heart. I shall die without one bitter thought if I can hear from your lips a tender word for your Blanche, for the mother of your children, if I know that you forgive her those things for which she did not forgive herself till reassured by the great tribunal which pardons all." "Blanche, Blanche," cried the broken man, shedding tears upon his wife's head, "Would you kill me?" He raised her with a strength unusual to him, kissed her solemnly on the forehead, and thus holding her continued, "Have I no forgiveness to ask of you? Have I never been harsh? Are you not making too much of your girlish scruples?" "Perhaps," she said. "But, dear friend, indulge the weakness of a dying woman, tranquilize my mind. When you reach this hour you will remember that I left you with a blessing. Will you grant me permission to leave to our friend now here that pledge of my affection?" she continued, showing a letter that was on the mantel shelf. "He is now my adopted son, and that is all. The heart, dear friend, makes its bequests. My last wishes impose a sacred duty on that dear Felix. I think I do not put too great a burden on him. Grant that I do not ask too much of you in desiring to leave him these last words. You see, I am always a woman," she said, bending her head with mournful sweetness. "After obtaining pardon I ask a gift. Read this," she added, giving me the letter, "but not until after my death." The Count saw her color change. He lifted her and carried her himself to the bed, where we all surrounded her. "Felix," she said, "I may have done something wrong to you. Often I gave you pain by letting you hope for that I could not give you. But see, it was that very courage of wife and mother that now enables me to die forgiven of all. You will forgive me too, you who have so often blamed me, and whose injustice was so dear." The Abbé Birotteau laid a finger on his lips. At that sign the dying woman bowed her head. Faintness overcame her. Presently she waved her hands as if summoning the clergy and her children and the servants to her presence, and then, with an imploring gesture, she showed me the desolate Count and the children beside him. The sight of that father, the secret of whose insanity was known to us alone, now to be left sole guardian of those delicate beings, brought mute entreaties to her face, which fell upon my heart like sacred fire. Before receiving extreme unction she asked pardon of her servants if by a hasty word she had sometimes hurt them. She asked their prayers and commended each one, individually, to the Count. She nobly confessed that during the last 2 months she had uttered complaints that were not Christian and might have shocked them. She had repulsed her children and clung to life unworthily, but she attributed this failure of submission to the will of God to her intolerable sufferings. Finally, she publicly thanked the Abbé Birotteau with heartfelt warmth for having shown her the illusion of all earthly things. When she ceased to speak, prayers were said again, and the curate of Such gave her the viaticum. A few moments later her breathing became difficult, a film overspread her eyes, but soon they cleared again. She gave me a last look and died to the eyes of earth, hearing perhaps the symphony of our sobs. As her last sigh issued from her lips, the effort of a life that was one long anguish, I felt a blow within me that struck on all my faculties. The Count and I remained beside the bier all night with the 2 abbés and the curate, watching, in the glimmer of the tapers, the body of the departed, now so calm, laid upon the mattress of her bed, where once she had suffered cruelly. It was my first communion with death. I remained the whole of that night with my eyes fixed on Harriet, spellbound by the pure expression that came from the stilling of all tempests, by the whiteness of that face where still I saw the traces of her innumerable affections, although it made no answer to my love. What majesty in that silence, in that coldness! How many thoughts they expressed! What beauty in that cold repose, what power in that immobility! All the past was there and futurity had begun. Ah! I loved her dead as much as I had loved her living. In the morning the Count went to bed. The 3 wearied priests fell asleep in that heavy hour of dawn so well known to those who watch. I could then, without witnesses, kiss that sacred brow with all the love I had never been allowed to utter. The 3rd day, in a cool autumn morning, we followed the Countess to her last home. She was carried by the old huntsman, the 2 Martiniaus, and Maynard's husband. We went down by the road I had so joyously ascended the day I first returned to her. We crossed the valley of the Indre to the little cemetery of Sach, a poor village graveyard, placed behind the church on the slope of the hill, where with true humility she had asked to be buried beneath a simple cross of black wood. Like a poor countrywoman, she said. When I saw, from the center of the valley, the village church and the place of the graveyard, a convulsive shudder seized me. Alas! We have all our Golgothas, where we leave the first 33 years of our lives, with the lance wound in our side, the crown of thorns and knot of roses on our brow. That hill slope was to me the mount of expiation. We were followed by an immense crowd, seeking to express the grief of the valley where she had silently buried so many noble actions. Maynard, her faithful woman, told me that when her savings did not suffice to help the poor, she economized upon her dress. There were babes to be provided for, naked children to be clothed, mothers succored in their need, sacks of flour brought to the millers in winter for helpless old men, a cow sent to some poor home, deeds of a Christian woman, a mother, and the lady of the manor. Besides these things, there were dowries paid to enable loving hearts to marry, substitutes bought for youths to whom the draught had brought despair, tender offerings of the loving women who had said, "The happiness of others is the consolation of those who cannot themselves be happy." Such things, related at the Vales, made the crowd immense. I walked with Jacques and the 2 abbeys behind the coffin. According to custom, neither the Count nor Madeleine were present, they remained alone at Clochegourde. But Maynard insisted in coming with us. Poor madam, she is happy now," I heard her saying to herself amid her sobs. As the procession left the road to the mills, I heard a simultaneous moan and a sound of weeping as though the valley were lamenting for its soul. The church was filled with people. After the service was over, we went to the graveyard where she wished to be buried near the cross. When I heard the pebbles and the gravel falling upon the coffin, my courage gave way. I staggered and asked the 2 Martiniaus to steady me. They took me, half dead, to the chateau of Sach, where the owners very kindly invited me to stay, and I accepted. I will own to you that I dreaded a return to Clochegourde, and it was equally repugnant to me to go to Frapesle, where I could see my Harriet's windows. Here, at Satch, I was near her. I lived for some days in a room which looked on the tranquil, solitary valley I have mentioned to you. It is a deep recess among the hills, bordered by oaks that are doubly centenarian, through which a torrent rushes after rain. The scene was in keeping with the stern and solemn meditations to which I desired to abandon myself. I had perceived, during the day which followed the fatal night, how unwelcome my presence might be at Clochegood. The Count had gone through violent emotions at the death of his wife, but he had expected the event. His mind was made up to it in a way that was something like indifference. I had noticed this several times, and when the Countess gave me that letter, which I still dared not read, and when she spoke of her affection for me, I remarked that the Count, usually so quick to take offense, made no sign of feeling any. He attributed Henriette's wording to the extreme sensitiveness of a conscience which he knew to be pure. This selfish insensibility was natural to him. The souls of these two beings were no more married than their bodies. They had never had the intimate communion which keeps feeling alive. They had shared neither pains nor pleasures, those strong links which tear us by 1,000 edges when broken, because they touch on all our fibers, and are fastened to the inmost recesses of our hearts. Another consideration forbade my return to Clochegood, Madeleine's hostility. That hard young girl was not disposed to modify her hatred beside her mother's coffin. Between the Count, who would have talked to me incessantly of himself, and the new mistress of the house, who would have shown me invincible dislike, I should have found myself horribly annoyed. To be treated thus where once the very flowers welcomed me, where the steps of the portico had a voice, where my memory clothed with poetry the balconies, the fountains, the balustrades, the trees, the glimpses of the valleys. To be hated where I once was loved, the thought was intolerable to me. So, from the first, my mind was made up. Alas! Alas! Was this the end of the keenest love that ever entered the heart of man? To the eyes of strangers my conduct might be reprehensible, but it had the sanction of my own conscience. It is thus that the noblest feelings, the sublimest dramas of our youth must end. We start at dawn, as I from Tours to Clochegood, we clutch the world, our hearts hungry for love. Then, when our treasure is in the crucible, when we mingle with men and circumstances, all becomes gradually debased and we find but little gold among the ashes. Such is life. Life as it is, great pretensions, small realities. I meditated long about myself, debating what I could do after a blow like this which had mown down every flower of my soul. I resolved to rush into the science of politics, into the labyrinth of ambition, to cast women from my life and to make myself a statesman, cold and passionless, and so remain true to the saint I loved. My thoughts wandered into far-off regions while my eyes were fastened on the splendid tapestry of the yellowing oaks, the stern summits, the bronzed foothills. I asked myself if Henriette's virtue were not, after all, that of ignorance, and if I were indeed guilty of her death. I fought against remorse. At last, in the sweetness of an autumn midday, one of those last smiles of heaven which are so beautiful in Touraine, I read the letter which at her request I was not to open before her death. Judge of my feelings as I read it. Madame de Morcerf to the Vicomte Felix de Vandenesse. Felix, friend, loved too well, I must now lay bare my heart to you, not so much to prove my love as to show you the weight of obligation you have incurred by the depth and gravity of the wounds you have inflicted on it. At this moment, when I sink exhausted by the toils of life, worn out by the shocks of its battle, the woman within me is, mercifully, dead, the mother alone survives. Dear, you are now to see how it was that you were the original cause of all my sufferings. Later, I willingly received your blows. Today I am dying of the final wound your hand has given, but there is joy, excessive joy in feeling myself destroyed by him I love. My physical sufferings will soon put an end to my mental strength. I therefore use the last clear gleams of intelligence to implore you to befriend my children and replace the heart of which you have deprived them. I would solemnly impose this duty upon you if I loved you less, but I prefer to let you choose it for yourself as an act of sacred repentance, and also in faithful continuance of your love. Love, for us, was ever mingled with repentant thoughts and expiatory fears. But, I know it well, we shall forever love each other. Your wrong to me was not so fatal an act in itself as the power which I let it have within me. Did I not tell you I was jealous, jealous unto death? Well, I die of it. But, be comforted, we have kept all human laws. The Church has told me, by one of her purest voices, that God will be forgiving to those who subdue their natural desires to His commandments. My beloved, you are now to know all, for I would not leave you in ignorance of any thought of mine. What I confide to God in my last hour you, too, must know, you, King of my heart as He is King of heaven. Until the ball given to the Duc d'Angoulême, the only ball at which I was ever present, marriage had left me in that ignorance which gives to the soul of a young girl the beauty of the angels. True, I was a mother, but love had never surrounded me with its permitted pleasures. How did this happen? I do not know, neither do I know by what law everything within me changed in a moment. You remember your kisses. They have mastered my life, they have furrowed my soul. The ardor of your blood awoke the ardor of mine, your youth entered my youth, your desires my soul. When I rose and left you proudly I was filled with an emotion for which I know no name in any language, for children have not yet found a word to express the marriage of their eyes with light, nor the kiss of life laid upon their lips. Yes, it was sound coming in the echo, light flashing through the darkness, motion shaking the universe, at least. It was rapid like all these things, but far more beautiful, for it was the birth of the soul. I comprehended then that something, I knew not what, existed for me in the world, a force nobler than thought, for it was all thoughts, all forces, it was the future itself in a shared emotion. I felt I was but half a mother. Falling thus upon my heart this thunderbolt awoke desires which slumbered there without my knowledge. Suddenly I divined all that my aunt had meant when she kissed my forehead, murmuring, "Poor Henriette." When I returned to Kloshgad, the springtime, the first leaves, the fragrance of the flowers, the white and fleecy clouds, the Indra, the sky, all spoke to me in a language till then unknown. If you have forgotten those terrible kisses, I have never been able to efface them from my memory. I am dying of them. Yes, each time that I have met you since, their impress is revived. I was shaken from head to foot when I first saw you. The mere presentiment of your coming overcame me. Neither time nor my firm will has enabled me to conquer that imperious sense of pleasure. I asked myself involuntarily, what must be such joys? Our mutual looks, the respectful kisses you laid upon my hand, the pressure of my arm on yours, your voice with its tender tones, all, even the slightest things, shook me so violently that clouds obscured my sight, the murmur of rebellious senses filled my ears. Ah! If in those moments when outwardly I increased my coldness you had taken me in your arms, I should have died of happiness. Sometimes I desired it, but prayer subdued the evil thought. Your name uttered by my children filled my heart with warmer blood, which gave color to my cheeks. I laid snares for my poor Madeleine to induce her to say it. So much did I love the tumults of that sensation. Ah! What shall I say to you? Your writing had a charm. I gazed at your letters as we look at a portrait. If on that first day you obtained some fatal power over me, conceive, dear friend, how infinite that power became when it was given to me to read your soul. What delights filled me when I found you so pure, so absolutely truthful, gifted with noble qualities, capable of noblest things, and already so tried. Man and child, timid yet brave. What joy to find we both were consecrated by a common grief. Ever since that evening when we confided our childhoods to each other, I have known that to lose you would be death. Yes, I have kept you by me selfishly. The certainty felt by Monsieur de la Berge that I should die if I lost you touched him deeply, for he read my soul. He knew how necessary I was to my children and the Count. He did not command me to forbid you my house, for I promised to continue pure in deed and thought. Thought, he said to me, is involuntary, but it can be watched even in the midst of anguish. If I think, I replied, all will be lost, save me from myself. Let him remain beside me and keep me pure. The good old man, though stern, was moved by my sincerity. Love him as you would a son, and give him your daughter, he said. I accepted bravely that life of suffering that I might not lose you, and I suffered joyfully, seeing that we were called to bear the same yoke, my God. I have been firm, faithful to my husband, I have given you no foothold, Felix, in your kingdom. The grandeur of my passion has reacted on my character. I have regarded the tortures Monsieur de Morcerf has inflicted on me as expiations. I bore them proudly in condemnation of my faulty desires. Formerly I was disposed to murmur at my life, but since you entered it I have recovered some gaiety, and this has been the better for the Count. Without this strength, which I derived through you, I should long since have succumbed to the inward life of which I told you. If you have counted for much in the exercise of my duty, so have my children also. I felt I had deprived them of something, and I feared I could never do enough to make amends to them. My life was thus a continual struggle which I loved. Feeling that I was less a mother, less an honest wife, remorse entered my heart. Fearing to fail in my obligations, I constantly went beyond them. Often have I put Madeleine between you and me, giving you to each other, raising barriers between us, barriers that were powerless. For what could stifle the emotions which you caused me? Absent or present, you had the same power. I preferred Madeleine to Jacques because Madeleine was some time to be yours. But I did not yield you to my daughter without a struggle. I told myself that I was only 28 when I first met you, and you were nearly 22. I shortened the distance between us. I gave myself up to delusive hopes. Oh, Felix! I tell you these things to save you from remorse, also, perhaps, to show you that I was not cold and insensible, that our sufferings were cruelly mutual, that Arabella had no superiority of love over mine. I too am the daughter of a fallen race, such as men love well. There came a moment when the struggle was so terrible that I wept the long nights through. My hair fell off. You have it. Do you remember the Count's illness? Your nobility of soul, far from raising my soul, belittled it. Alas! I dreamed of giving myself to you some day as the reward of so much heroism, but the folly was a brief one. I laid it at the feet of God during the Mass that day when you refused to be with me. Jacques' illness and Madeleine's sufferings seemed to me the warnings of God calling back to him his lost sheep. Then your love, which is so natural, for that Englishwoman, revealed to me secrets of which I had no knowledge. I loved you better than I knew. The constant emotions of this stormy life, the efforts that I made to subdue myself with no other succor than that religion gave me, all has brought about the malady of which I die. The terrible shocks I have undergone brought on attacks about which I kept silence. I saw in death the sole solution of this hidden tragedy. A lifetime of anger, jealousy, and rage lay in those 2 months between the time my mother told me of your relations with Lady Dudley, and your return to Clochegourde. I wished to go to Paris, murder was in my heart, I desired that woman's death, I was indifferent to my children. Prayer, which had hitherto been to me a balm, was now without influence on my soul. Jealousy made the breach through which death has entered. And yet I have kept a placid brow. Yes, that period of struggle was a secret between God and myself. After your return, and when I saw that I was loved, even as I loved you, that nature had betrayed me and not your thought, I wished to live. It was then too late. God had taken me under his protection, filled no doubt with pity for a being true with herself, true with him, whose sufferings had often led her to the gates of the sanctuary. My beloved, God has judged me, Monsieur de Morcerf will pardon me, but will you be merciful? Will you listen to this voice which now issues from my tomb? Will you repair the evils of which we are equally guilty, you, perhaps, less than I? You know what I wish to ask of you. Be to Monsieur de Morcerf what a sister of charity is to a sick man. Listen to him, love him, no one loves him. Interpose between him and his children as I have done. Your task will not be a long one. Jacques will soon leave home to be in Paris near his grandfather, and you have long promised me to guide him through the dangers of that life. As for Madeleine, she will marry. I pray that you may please her. She is all myself, but stronger. She has the will in which I am lacking, the energy necessary for the companion of a man whose career destines him to the storms of political life. She is clever and perceptive. If your lives are united, she will be happier than her mother. By acquiring the right to continue my work at Clochegourde, you will blot out the faults I have not sufficiently expiated, though they are pardoned in heaven and also on earth, for he is generous and will forgive me. You see, I am ever selfish. Is it not the proof of a despotic love? I wish you to still love me in mine. Unable to be yours in life, I bequeath to you my thoughts and also my duties. If you do not wish to marry Madeleine, you will at least seek the repose of my soul by making Monsieur de Morcerf as happy as he ever can be. Farewell, dear child of my heart. This is the farewell of a mind absolutely sane, still full of life, the farewell of a spirit on which thou hast shed too many and too great joys to suffer thee to feel remorse for the catastrophe they have caused. I use that word catastrophe thinking of you and how you love me. As for me, I reach the haven of my rest, sacrificed to duty and not without regret. Ah! I tremble at that thought. God knows better than I whether I have fulfilled His holy laws in accordance with their spirit. Often, no doubt, I have tottered, but I have not fallen. The most potent cause of my wrongdoing lay in the grandeur of the seductions that encompassed me. The Lord will behold me trembling when I enter His presence as though I had succumbed. Farewell again, a long farewell like that I gave last night to our dear valley, where I soon shall rest and where you will often, will you not, return? Henriette. I fell into an abyss of terrible reflections, as I perceived the depths unknown of the life now lighted up by this expiring flame. The clouds of my egotism rolled away. She had suffered as much as I, more than I, for she was dead. She believed that others would be kind to her friend. She was so blinded by love that she had never so much as suspected the enmity of her daughter. That last proof of her tenderness pained me terribly. Poor Henriette wished to give me Clochegourde and her daughter. Natalie, from that dread day when first I entered a graveyard following the remains of my noble Henriette, whom now you know, the sun has been less warm, less luminous, the nights more gloomy, movement less agile, thought more dull. There are some departed whom we bury in the earth, but there are others more deeply loved for whom our souls are winding sheets, whose memory mingles daily with our heartbeats. We think of them as we breathe. They are in us by the tender law of a metempsychosis special to love. A soul is within my soul. When some good thing is done by me, when some true word is spoken, that soul acts and speaks. All that is good within me issues from that grave, as the fragrance of a lily fills the air. Sarcasm, bitterness, all that you blame in me is mine. Natalie, when next my eyes are darkened by a cloud or raised to heaven after long contemplation of earth, when my lips make no reply to your words or your devotion, do not ask me again, of what are you thinking? Dear Natalie, I ceased to write some days ago, these memories were too bitter for me. Still, I owe you an account of the events which followed this catastrophe, they need few words. When a life is made up of action and movement it is soon told, but when it passes in the higher regions of the soul its story becomes diffuse. Henriette's letter put the star of hope before my eyes. In this great shipwreck I saw an isle on which I might be rescued. To live at Clochegourde with Madeleine, consecrating my life to hers, was a fate which satisfied the ideas of which my heart was full. But it was necessary to know the truth as to her real feelings. As I was bound to bid the Count farewell, I went to Clochegourde to see him, and met him on the terrace. We walked up and down for some time. At first he spoke of the Countess like a man who knew the extent of his loss, and all the injury it was doing to his inner self. But after the first outbreak of his grief was over he seemed more concerned about the future than the present. He feared his daughter, who, he told me, had not her mother's gentleness. Madeleine's firm character, in which there was something heroic blending with her mother's gracious nature, alarmed the old man, used to Henriette's tenderness, and he now foresaw the power of a will that never yielded. His only consolation for his irreparable loss, he said, was the certainty of soon rejoining his wife. The agitations, the griefs of these last few weeks had increased his illness and brought back all his former pains. The struggle which he foresaw between his authority as a father and that of his daughter, now mistress of the house, would end his days in bitterness, for though he should have struggled against his wife, he should, he knew, be forced to give way before his child. Besides, his son was soon to leave him, his daughter would marry, and what sort of son-in-law was he likely to have? Though he thus talked of dying, his real distress was in feeling himself alone for many years to come without sympathy. During this hour when he spoke only of himself, and asked for my friendship in his wife's name, he completed a picture in my mind of the remarkable figure of the émigré, one of the most imposing types of our period. In appearance he was frail and broken, but life seemed persistent in him because of his sober habits and his country avocations. He is still living. Though Madeleine could see me on the terrace, she did not come down. Several times she came out upon the portico and went back in again, as if to signify her contempt. I seized a moment when she appeared to beg the Count to go to the house and call her, saying I had a last wish of her mother to convey to her, and this would be my only opportunity of doing so. The Count brought her, and left us alone together on the terrace. Dear Madeleine, I said, if I am to speak to you, surely it should be here where your mother listened to me when she felt she had less reason to complain of me than of the circumstances of life. I know your thoughts, but are you not condemning me without a knowledge of the facts? My life and happiness are bound up in this place, you know that, and yet you seek to banish me by the coldness you show, in place of the brotherly affection which has always united us, and which death should have strengthened by the bonds of a common grief. Dear Madeleine, you for whom I would gladly give my life without hope of recompense, without your even knowing it, so deeply do we love the children of those who have succored us. You are not aware of the project your adorable mother cherished during the last 7 years. If you knew it, your feelings would doubtless soften towards me, but I do not wish to take advantage of you now. All that I ask is that you do not deprive me of the right to come here, to breathe the air on this terrace, and to wait until time has changed your ideas of social life. At this moment I desire not to ruffle them. I respect a grief which misleads you, for it takes even from me the power of judging soberly the circumstances in which I find myself. The saint who now looks down upon us will approve the reticence with which I simply ask that you stand neutral between your present feelings and my wishes. I love you too well, in spite of the aversion you are showing me, to say one word to the Count of a proposal he would welcome eagerly. Be free. Later, remember that you know no one in the world as you know me, that no man will ever have more devoted feelings. Up to this moment Madeleine had listened with lowered eyes. Now she stopped me by a gesture. Monsieur, she said, in a voice trembling with emotion. I know all your thoughts, but I shall not change my feelings towards you. I would rather fling myself into the Indra than ally myself to you. I will not speak to you of myself, but if my mother's name still possesses any power over you, in her name I beg you never to return to Clochegard so long as I am in it. The mere sight of you causes me a repugnance I cannot express, but which I shall never overcome. She bowed to me with dignity, and returned to the house without looking back, impassible as her mother had been for one day only, but more pitiless. The searching eye of that young girl had discovered, though tardily, the secrets of her mother's heart, and her hatred to the man whom she fancied fatal to her mother's life may have been increased by a sense of her innocent complicity. All before me was now chaos. Madeleine hated me, without considering whether I was the cause or the victim of these misfortunes. She might have hated us equally, her mother and me, had we been happy. Thus it was that the edifice of my happiness fell in ruins. I alone knew the life of that unknown, noble woman. I alone had entered every region of her soul. Neither mother, father, husband, nor children had ever known her. Strange truth. I stir this heap of ashes and take pleasure in spreading them before you. All hearts may find something in them of their closest experience. How many families have had their Harriet? How many noble feelings have left this earth with no historian to fathom their hearts, to measure the depth and breadth of their spirits? Such is human life in all its truth. Often mothers know their children as little as their children know them. So it is with husbands, lovers, brothers. Did I imagine that one day, beside my father's coffin, I should contend with my brother Charles, for whose advancement I had done so much? Good God! How many lessons in the simplest history! When Madeleine disappeared into the house, I went away with a broken heart. Bidding farewell to my host at Satch, I started for Paris, following the right bank of the Indre, the one I had taken when I entered the valley for the first time. Sadly, I drove through the pretty village of Pont de Rouen. Yet I was rich. Political life courted me. I was not the weary plodder of 1814. Then my heart was full of eager desires, now my eyes were full of tears. Once my life was all before me to fill as I could, now I knew it to be a desert. I was still young, only 29, but my heart was withered. A few years had sufficed to despoil that landscape of its early glory, and to disgust me with life. You can imagine my feelings when, on turning round, I saw Madeleine on the terrace. A prey to imperious sadness, I gave no thought to the end of my journey. Lady Dudley was far, indeed, from my mind, and I entered the courtyard of her house without reflection. The folly once committed, I was forced to carry it out. My habits were conjugal in her house, and I went upstairs thinking of the annoyances of a rupture. If you have fully understood the character and manners of Lady Dudley, you can imagine my discomfiture when her majordomo ushered me, still in my travelling dress, into a salon where I found her sumptuously dressed and surrounded by 4 persons. Lord Dudley, one of the most distinguished old statesmen of England, was standing with his back to the fireplace, stiff, haughty, frigid, with the sarcastic air he doubtless wore in Parliament. He smiled when he heard my name. Arabella's 2 children, who were amazingly like de Marsay, a natural son of the old lord, were near their mother. De Marsay himself was on the sofa beside her. As soon as Arabella saw me she assumed a distant air, and glanced at my travelling cap as if to ask what brought me there. She looked me over from head to foot, as though I were some country gentleman just presented to her. As for our intimacy, that eternal passion, those vows of suicide if I ceased to love her, those visions of Armida, all had vanished like a dream. I had never clasped her hand, I was a stranger, she knew me not. In spite of the diplomatic self-possession to which I was gradually being trained, I was confounded, and all others in my place would have felt the same. De Marsay smiled at his boots, which he examined with remarkable interest. I decided at once upon my course. From any other woman I should modestly have accepted my defeat, but, outraged at the glowing appearance of the heroine who had vowed to die for love, and who had scoffed at the woman who was really dead, I resolved to meet insolence with insolence. She knew very well the misfortunes of Lady Brandon. To remind her of them was to send a dagger to her heart, though the weapon might be blunted by the blow. "Madam," I said, "I am sure you will pardon my unceremonious entrance, when I tell you that I have just arrived from Touraine, and that Lady Brandon has given me a message for you which allows of no delay. I feared you had already started for Lancashire, but as you are still in Paris I will await your orders at any hour you may be pleased to appoint." She bowed, and I left the room. Since that day I have only met her in society, where we exchange a friendly bow, and occasionally a sarcasm. I talk to her of the inconsolable women of Lancashire, She makes allusion to French women who dignify their gastric troubles by calling them despair. Thanks to her, I have a mortal enemy in de Marsay, of whom she is very fond. In return, I call her the wife of 2 generations. So my disaster was complete, it lacked nothing. I followed the plan I had laid out for myself during my retreat at Sach. I plunged into work and gave myself wholly to science, literature, and politics. I entered the diplomatic service on the accession of Charles X, who suppressed the employment I held under the late king. From that moment I was firmly resolved to pay no further attention to any woman, no matter how beautiful, witty, or loving she might be. This determination succeeded admirably. I obtained a really marvelous tranquility of mind, and great powers of work, and I came to understand how much these women waste our lives, believing, all the while, that a few gracious words will repay us. But, all my resolutions came to naught, you know how and why. Dear Natalie, in telling you my life, without reserve, without concealment, precisely as I tell it to myself, in relating to you feelings in which you have had no share, perhaps I have wounded some corner of your sensitive and jealous heart. But that which might anger a common woman will be to you, I feel sure of it, an additional reason for loving me. Noble women have indeed a sublime mission to fulfill to suffering and sickened hearts, the mission of the sister of charity who stanches the wound, of the mother who forgives a child. Artists and poets are not the only ones who suffer, men who work for their country, for the future destiny of the nations, enlarging thus the circle of their passions and their thoughts, often make for themselves a cruel solitude. They need a pure, devoted love beside them. Believe me, they understand its grandeur and its worth. Tomorrow I shall know if I have deceived myself in loving you. Felix. Answer to the envoy Madame la Comtesse Nathalie de Manerville to Monsieur le Comte Félix de Vandenesse. Dear Count, you received a letter from poor Madame de Morcerf, which, you say, was of use in guiding you through the world, a letter to which you owe your distinguished career. Permit me to finish your education. Give up, I beg of you, a really dreadful habit. Do not imitate certain widows who talk of their first husband and throw the virtues of the deceased in the face of their second. I am a French woman, dear Count. I wish to marry the whole of the man I love, and I really cannot marry Madame de Morcerf too. Having read your tale with all the attention it deserves, and you know the interest I feel in you, it seems to me that you must have wearied Lady Dudley with the perfections of Madame de Morcerf, and done great harm to the Countess by overwhelming her with the experiences of your English love. Also you have failed in tact to me, poor creature, without other merit than that of pleasing you. You have given me to understand that I cannot love as Henriette or Arabella loved you. I acknowledge my imperfections, I know them, but why so roughly make me feel them? Shall I tell you whom I pity, the fourth woman whom you love? She will be forced to struggle against 3 others. Therefore, in your interests as well as in hers, I must warn you against the dangers of your tale. For myself, I renounce the laborious glory of loving you, It needs too many virtues, Catholic or Anglican, and I have no fancy for rivaling phantoms. The virtues of the Virgin of Kloshgard would dishearten any woman, however sure of herself she might be, and your intrepid English Amazon discourages even a wish for that sort of happiness. No matter what a poor woman may do, she can never hope to give you the joys she will aspire to give. Neither heart nor senses can triumph against these memories of yours. I own that I have never been able to warm the sunshine chilled for you by the death of your sainted Henriette. I have felt you shuddering beside me. My friend, for you will always be my friend, never make such confidences again, they lay bare your disillusions, they discourage love, and compel a woman to feel doubtful of herself. Love, dear Count, can only live on trustfulness. The woman who before she says a word or mounts her horse, must ask herself whether a celestial Henriette might not have spoken better, whether a rider like Arabella was not more graceful. That woman, you may be very sure, will tremble in all her members. You certainly have given me a desire to receive a few of those intoxicating bouquets, but you say you will make no more. There are many other things you dare no longer do, thoughts and enjoyments you can never reawaken. No woman, and you ought to know this, will be willing to elbow in your heart the phantom whom you hold there. You ask me to love you out of Christian charity. I could do much, I candidly admit, for charity, in fact I could do all, except love. You are sometimes wearisome and wearied, you call your dullness melancholy. Very good, so be it, but all the same it is intolerable, and causes much cruel anxiety to one who loves you. I have often found the grave of that saint between us. I have searched my own heart, I know myself, and I own I do not wish to die as she did. If you tired out Lady Dudley, who is a very distinguished woman, I, who have not her passionate desires, should, I fear, turn coldly against you even sooner than she did. Come, let us suppress love between us, inasmuch as you can find happiness only with the dead, and let us be merely friends, I wish it. Ah! My dear Count, what a history you have told me. At your entrance into life you found an adorable woman, a perfect mistress, who thought of your future, made you appear, loved you to distraction, only asked that you would be faithful to her, and you killed her. I know nothing more monstrous. Among all the passionate and unfortunate young men who haunt the streets of Paris, I doubt if there is one who would not stay virtuous 10 years to obtain one half of the favors you did not know how to value. When a man is loved like that, how can he ask more? Poor woman! She suffered indeed, and after you have written a few sentimental phrases you think you have balanced your account with her coffin. Such, no doubt, is the end that awaits my tenderness for you. Thank you, dear Count, I will have no rival on either side of the grave. When a man has such a crime upon his conscience, at least he ought not to tell of it. I made you an imprudent request, but I was true to my woman's part as a daughter of Eve. It was your part to estimate the effect of the answer. You ought to have deceived me, later I should have thanked you. Is it possible that you have never understood the special virtue of lovers? Can you not feel how generous they are in swearing that they have never loved before, and love at last for the first time? No, your program cannot be carried out. To attempt to be both Madame de Morcerf and Lady Dudley, why, my dear friend, it would be trying to unite fire and water within me. Is it possible that you don't know women? Believe me, they are what they are, and they have therefore the defects of their virtues. You met Lady Dudley too early in life to appreciate her, and the harm you say of her seems to me the revenge of your wounded vanity. You understood Madame de Morcerf too late, you punished one for not being the other. What would happen to me if I were neither the one nor the other? I love you enough to have thought deeply about your future. In fact, I really care for you a great deal. Your air of the Knight of the Sad Countenance has always deeply interested me. I believed in the constancy of melancholy men, but I little thought that you had killed the loveliest and the most virtuous of women at the opening of your life. Well, I ask myself, what remains for you to do? I have thought it over carefully. I think, my friend, that you will have to marry a Mrs. Shandy, who will know nothing of love or of passion, and will not trouble herself about Madame de Morcerf or Lady Dudley, who will be wholly indifferent to those moments of ennui which you call melancholy, during which you are as lively as a rainy day, a wife who will be to you, in short, the excellent sister of charity whom you are seeking. But as for loving, quivering at a word, anticipating happiness, giving it, receiving it, experiencing all the tempests of passion, cherishing the little weaknesses of a beloved woman, my dear Count, renounce it all. You have followed the advice of your good angel about young women too closely. You have avoided them so carefully that now you know nothing about them. Madame de Morcerf was right to place you high in life at the start, otherwise all women would have been against you, and you never would have risen in society. It is too late now to begin over again, too